Hello everybody, it's Dr. Rukas again, and we are now on our third and final lecture for the semester. And once again, as always, welcome. And what we're going to look at today, we've been looking at problems, we've been looking at other civil rights movements, but I don't want to leave this course on a down note. I actually want to let you know that this is not a defeating strain of thought, that there are solutions that come from it. And that's what we want to look at. In your readings for this module, you're going to be reading a variety, a number of different solutions, and I kind of want to go over them a bit. Let's start with the most controversial, and that's whether or not we legalize drugs. I've got the DEA readings there, and the DEA says no, absolutely not. However, in counter to that, and most of you have actually seen the DEA argument, I'm giving it to you more as a balance so that you can compare and contrast both points of view. The DEA reading was done in 2003, but it is still available through the DEA, so it's a document that they consider to be valid. But the second reading, I think that's really interesting, and I think most of you will find most interesting, is Goldsmith's argument. Goldsmith says, drugs are causing a lot of problems, all right, and they're really bad, really, really bad. Drugs are bad. But is our reaction to them worse than drugs themselves? And that's an interesting notion. Drugs in many different forms, and actually even today we have the drug of alcohol. But drugs have been a part of global societies for a long time. And there hasn't been the war on it. We have the Chinese opium dens. For that matter, in the United States, Coca-Cola is called Coca-Cola for a reason. When it was originally founded, it had some cocaine in it. I'd love to see what soda fountains looked like when that was around. But they have been around. And Goldsmith says they're bad. Goldsmith isn't even a fan of alcohol. And he says that's bad. But he makes the argument that the war on drugs is a lot worse. And that our solution is worse than the original problem. And he makes a number of arguments there that I think are fascinating reading. But the first is, of course, that this is very expensive. The fact that we're spending so much on the war on drugs has sapped our ability to fund other things that could be used to stop people from, or at least to help addicts and help those that get involved with drugs get out. And the second is that there's civil liberties, which is a really big issue, in that we've empowered police departments significantly more since we've had this war on drugs, and that drug crimes, police are able to do many things that they're unable to do in other crimes. One of the most significant, and Goldsmith talks about this in length, is the notion of asset forfeiture, where your property can be guilty of a crime, even if you're found not guilty, you still can't get your property back if the property was guilty. Now, Goldsmith then takes a look at this and says, this is all that's wrong. This really costs us a ton of money. And he admits that if we legalize drugs, we're going to have more addicts. But he doesn't think that we're going to have a lot more addicts. And he breaks society down into various segments. He says there are some of those that making drugs illegal doesn't matter. We still have addicts today, even though drugs are illegal. And to be honest, let's call alcohol a drug. Alcohol, and I mean to back that up, I think many of you know people that use marijuana, and I can tell you that on any college campus, even though the legal age to consume the drug of alcohol is 21, there's a lot of people underage that are drinking alcohol. And that's just not limited to college campuses, by the way. So you're going to have people that are going to consume no matter what. The second group that Goldsmith talks about is the notion of the teetotaler, that no matter what you do, the teetotaler is not going to consume. All right? And then there's this middle group. And there's this group on the margins. Now, Goldsmith points out, and research does back this up, by the way, that many people are able to use drugs, even illicit drugs, without becoming addicted. The question remains is how big is this number? And, of course, it varies by drug. And if we have more resources for the additional people that would become addicted, and society takes a view that addicted people, instead of being criminalized, should view that as a sign that people need treatment, is addiction going to have will addiction have as high of a cost to society as the drug war currently does? Now, Goldsmith doesn't think so. And Goldsmith argues that society is overall better. Reason I had you read this is it's probably the only argument out there about legalizing drugs that actually makes an argument based on the nature of the drug war. I won't say the nature of the drug war, but makes an argument that's not emotionally based. And it's coming actually from somebody that has a huge dislike for illegal drugs overall. Goldsmith writes this as not a user, but as a retiring college professor, now a retired college professor. All right, the second plan that I'm having you read is William Julius Wilson, and I'm actually going to use my word for it. Wilson proposes a Marshall Plan for the inner city. And Wilson says, you know what? Racism is a big issue until the 60s. Racism now is illegal and it's gone. The big problem now is class. All right? And because of class, we can't use race-based solutions. We have to use solutions that are designed to lift all of the poor out of poverty. All right? And he says, because African Americans are still disproportionately poor, that by creating solutions that lift everyone out of poverty, that we will elevate, it'll have a disproportionate impact on African Americans. Now, there are a number of points. I just want to go over a few of them here, but also a very intriguing suggestion. The first is that we change the way tax revenue is distributed. And one of the things I've tried to point out as part of these lectures is the role that tax revenue plays. Whereas the federal government arguably relies on tax revenue. Let me put it that way. I don't want to make a statement there. But it's not tax revenue that we see in action. And dare I say, a lot of it's floundered. But on the local level, tax revenue is really important because it funds services that you and I use. All right? And the fact of the matter is one reason why schools are better in the suburbs than they are in the inner city is the fact that suburbs have more money to put into them. So Goldsmith says, you know what? Rather than actually distributing tax money by how wealthy a community is, let's instead create a pool of regional tax money that we distribute where the need is biggest. And that's going to disproportionately help low-income individuals. The second, he says, is we need better schools, and that schools need to be more accountable, and that we have to have a system of accountability. Many of you now take many of you have taken standardized state tests as part of your K through 12 education. Those tests are a direct result of Wilson's policy being put into action by a law called No Child Left Behind, now replaced by the Common Core, that uses those tests, at least in theory, to make schools accountable. Third, he says that people need to have a living wage with a high school diploma. That it's insane that we require people to fork out a ton of money for a college education when we have a college education when a lot of jobs don't require a college education. And however, these jobs don't pay a living wage, and they make it impractical for people to get into. Wilson says we need to change that dynamic so that college educations not so much are used as a way to make more money and get better jobs in the labor market, but that college educations are reserved for professions that actually need an additional level of education. And finally, Wilson says, is that if the private sector is unable to provide those jobs, that government should be an employer of last resort. Just slipping back to living wage, you actually see Wilson's philosophy very much in the $15 an hour movement. There have been many criticisms of this, particularly the fact that $15 an hour in New York or in a major East Coast city is not the same as $15 an hour in places like Arkansas, and that the impact on businesses would be very different. That said, I'm just pointing this out, that this is one of Wilson's solutions for the answer, because he feels that crime is rooted in economic opportunity, and that if we make the economics better, we're going to have less crime. Now, another solution that I feel is really interesting to read and worthy of discussion, because the book has actually gotten a great deal of discussion, is Davis's notion that we abolish prisons. Davis makes an argument in her book that I think actually is rather effective. It says prisons are broken. It says they're broken. She goes through the history of prisons, starting with their roots in Europe, going to the Eastern State Penitentiary, and how we've gotten to where we are. And she says that prison disproportionately impacts the poor. And she makes an argument that the system's corrupt. As a result, Davis says, this system has to go and needs to be abolished. Now, she says the way that we do that is we uncouple the notions of crime and punishment, and that we create solutions to crime that don't necessarily involve punishment, and that if people commit crime, we take a more communal approach to seeing why the crime occurred and provide resources to help them. I think. One of the things Davis has been criticized for, and I say I think tongue-in-cheek, is that Davis makes an argument that prisons aren't working right now, but she doesn't come up with a heck of a lot of alternatives. Anyway, an interesting solution to think about. Again, she makes a very strong argument about the need for reform, but it would be really interesting, I think, if her argument actually articulated what those reforms should be. The penultimate solution we're going to talk about is Mayor Bloomberg's initiative in New York City. And this is designed to create both funding and incentives for those living in low-income neighborhoods to pursue educations that are geared toward getting the skills they need to be successful in the labor market. He claims the initiative is going to be aimed primarily toward African American and Latino men. Now, keep in mind, he's putting his centers in low-income housing projects. Almost exclusively in New York, low-income housing projects are complexes. I shouldn't use the term project anymore, but complexes are populated by African American and Latino men, which is why the initiative is aimed at that. And many complexes are exclusively consist of these people. Keep in mind, New York's a very big city. And he says they need to get skills in the labor market, but he says if we just offer classes and offer some sort of long-term reward, people aren't going to necessarily do it because they need the money now. And to get around that, he proposes paying $7.25 an hour. Now, with the living wage movement, that could go up. Still too early. This has actually happened. Obviously, it's not something that governments want to do, but it's something that he's funded with his own money. And I'm going to be curious to see what research says is the outcome of this. Really interesting notion. And the final one is California Prop 47, which actually was approved by voters of the state of California in 2014. Now, let me give you a little background on this. This did not come as a cry for criminal justice reform. This came out of the fact that California's prisons were so overcrowded that the court said either build more or let people out. California didn't have the money at the time. It was going through a great fiscal crisis and didn't want to build more. Actually, there's also a lot of resistance in the state to building more prisons just because of the cultural attitude of the state. But this came out as a solution. And the question that was asked was, are we locking up people that really need to be locked up, or are we locking up people we're just mad at? And does it do any good to put a minor level offender into a prison situation? All right? Somebody that writes bad checks. Do we want to put them in an environment of drug dealers? And are prisons becoming just a way to teach people how to become better criminals? And the answer was no. So what they did was they reduced some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, and you've got a whole list there of crimes that were reduced. And instead of sending those people to prison, they put them into the county. They had them dealt with at the county level where misdemeanors are handled. And a corrections course will go into the dynamics of jails and prisons. That's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But then what it would do is, because we were incarcerating fewer people, is we would divert the money into programs that are designed to stop crime. The biggest of which is mental health and drug treatment. As we all know, most of those incarcerated have drug or mental health issues. Money into schools. That's kind of based on Wilson's philosophy that we need better schools if we're going to do anything. And then finally, because victims many times are lost in the process, that we provide a funding source for victim. Now, this was approved in 2014. There were some very rough implementation issues on this. There were supposed to be support services. These support services were supposed to be up. The mental health and drug treatments, particularly mental health and drug treatment, but they were not up at the same time that this law came to pass, because many of the counties that were the state was a little bit slow to release money, and many of the counties that were supposed to run these programs took a while to get them up and running. However, initial research shows, and again, it's too soon to really tell, is that property crime is up. It's up slightly. It's not up big time, but we're not seeing any increase in violent crime. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this once the drug and mental health programs are going full throttle, and the communities have a system down to implement this, whether crime goes up or not. And if crime does not go up, it makes a very interesting argument about the type of money we spend on incarceration. This is my shortest of the lectures, and I do thank you very, very much for listening. And I want to let you know it's been a pleasure being your lecturer in this course. This is a course I really enjoy, and I hope you've learned a lot this semester. Thank you very much, and as always, you all have a great day. Take care. Bye.